Liam felt the familiar weight of the small, leather-bound notebook in his jacket pocket. It was a comforting presence, a silent repository of his thoughts, his ambitions, and, more recently, his disappointments. From his discreet corner table in the softly lit alcove of Ethelgard, he had a perfect, uninterrupted view of the restaurant's main entrance. He had designed it that way. He had designed everything that way. The flow of the room, the way the light from the bespoke chandeliers caught the grain of the polished oak, the precise distance between tables that allowed for intimacy without sacrificing the energy of the space. It was all a symphony of his creation. And tonight, the lead violinist in his carefully conducted masterpiece was his wife's boyfriend. Liam watched as Chloe entered, her arm linked with a man who was the physical embodiment of a boast. Julian was all-sharp suit, gleaming watch, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He moved with the unearned confidence of someone who had always mistaken money for worth. Chloe, his wife of 7 years, looked radiant and deeply uncomfortable, a combination Liam had come to recognize over the past few months. Julian gestured expansively, his voice a low boom that still managed to carry across the hushed dining room. He was performing, and Chloe was his captive audience. They thought this was Julian's world, a stage for his success. They didn't know the stage, the lights, the very air they breathed belonged to Liam. Within the next 2 hours, their entire reality would be dismantled piece by painful piece, and he would be the one holding the hammer. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another story. We've all felt underestimated at some point, haven't we? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoy watching arrogance meet its match, you're in the right place. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because you are not going to want to miss how this ends. Now, let's get back to it. The decline had been gradual, a slow erosion of shared dreams and mutual respect. Liam and Chloe had met in a crowded university library, two people drawn together by a shared ambition, albeit in different fields. He was the quiet, intense architecture student who saw poetry in structural integrity. She was the vibrant, charismatic marketing major who saw stories in everything. For years, their ambitions had run parallel, supporting each other. He admired her ability to command a room. She admired his ability to create one. He'd gone to work for a prestigious firm, earning a solid, respectable living, while she climbed the ladder at a boutique advertising agency. Their life was comfortable, a carefully constructed edifice of modern love. But a hairline crack had appeared about a year ago. Liam, feeling stifled by the corporate world's creative limitations, had made a terrifying decision. He resigned from his stable, high-paying job to start his own architectural firm. He called it Nexus Designs. To him, it was a declaration of independence, a chance to build things that mattered, things with soul. To Chloe, it was a terrifying leap into instability. Their income halved overnight. The sleek German sedan was traded for a reliable but unimpressive domestic model. Dinners at trendy new spots were replaced with carefully budgeted meals at home. Liam was energized, pouring every waking hour into his work, filling his leather notebook with frantic, beautiful sketches of lines and angles. Chloe, however, saw only what was lost. She saw the invitations to gallery openings dry up. She saw her friends' husbands getting promotions and buying vacation homes, while hers came home with graphite smudged on his hands and a dreamy look in his eyes that no longer seemed to include her. The respect that had once been the foundation of their marriage began to crumble. She started referring to his life's work as his little hobby or his drawing projects. The words were small, but they landed like stones, chipping away at him. He never argued. He would simply absorb the blow, his jaw tightening for a fraction of a second, before retreating into the quiet sanctuary of his notebook. Then came Julian. Chloe had taken a new job as a senior marketing director at a high-flying financial technology firm, a world of aggressive growth and ostentatious bonuses. Julian was a star trader there, a man who measured his day in six-figure swings and spoke a language of pure profit. He was everything Liam was not: loud, materialistic, and utterly convinced of his own importance. He became Chloe's work friend, then her mentor soon. His name was a constant presence in their home, a ghost at their dinner table. Julian bought that. Julian was taking the whole team to Monaco. Liam saw the shift in Chloe with a clarity that broke his heart. She started dressing differently, her classic, elegant style replaced by something sharper, more expensive, more Julian. She grew critical of their apartment, the home he had lovingly renovated for them with his own hands. She would sigh dramatically at the sight of his modest car. The erosion had become a landslide. Liam knew, with the same certainty he knew a building's load-bearing walls, that his marriage was on the verge of collapse. He could have fought, yelled, demanded, but that was not his way. An architect does not scream at a flawed foundation. He assesses the damage, understands the stresses, and decides whether to reinforce or to demolish and rebuild. He was still in the assessment phase. He just kept sketching, observing, and waiting. He knew something his wife and her arrogant new friend didn't. His little project was no longer little. While they were laughing at his quiet ambition, he had been building an empire in silence, and they had just walked through its front door. The first true test, the moment the hairline crack in their marriage became a chasm, had occurred 3 months prior at Chloe's parents' anniversary dinner. It was held at their sprawling suburban home, a place of manicured lawns and polite, unspoken judgments. Chloe had insisted they go, and she had also insisted on inviting Julian. "He's practically family, Liam," she had said, a statement so breathtakingly false it had left him momentarily speechless. Liam had driven them in his unassuming sedan, a car that had become a symbol of his supposed failure in Chloe's eyes. Julian, naturally, arrived separately in a low-slung, screaming red sports car that announced its price tag from a block away. He parked it ostentatiously in the driveway, making Liam's car, parked legally on the street, look like a servant's vehicle. Chloe's father, a man who appreciated the solid weight of old money, had raised a skeptical eyebrow at Julian's automotive peacocking, but Chloe had rushed to his side, her laughter bright and brittle. Dinner was an exercise in sustained humiliation. Julian held court at the table, regaling Chloe's parents with tales of market conquests and extravagant purchases. He spoke of stocks and bonds as if they were personal friends and dismissed entire countries' economies with a wave of his hand. He turned to Liam, who had been quietly discussing a local community garden project with Chloe's mother, and draped a condescending arm over the back of his chair. "So, Liam," Julian began, his voice dripping with faux camaraderie. "Chloe tells me you've gone freelance. Drawing up plans for what is it? Patios? Garden sheds? Good for you, man. Every empire needs its little outbuildings." The table fell silent. Chloe's father stared at his plate. Her mother's smile faltered. Chloe herself looked down, a faint blush of shame or excitement. Liam couldn't tell which, coloring her cheeks. She said nothing. That was the moment the silent enabler was born. Her silence was a verdict, an endorsement of the insult. It echoed in the space between heartbeats. Liam felt a cold, clear calm settle over him. He did not rise to the bait. He simply met Julian's smug gaze and offered a small, placid smile. "Something like that," he said, his voice even. "I find that the most complex structures often have the humblest beginnings. It's all about the foundation." Julian, missing the subtext entirely, clapped him on the shoulder. Sure. Foundation. Whatever you say. Just let me know when you graduate to skyscrapers, buddy. I might have some work for you." He laughed, a loud, braying sound, and Chloe forced a small laugh to join his. Later, as they were leaving, Julian cornered Liam by the door while Chloe was saying her goodbyes. "Listen, man to man," Julian said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Chloe's a thoroughbred. She needs room to run. She's playing the big leagues with me now. You keeping her in this little stable, it's not fair to her. You need to either step up or step aside." It was a declaration of war, delivered with the smarmy confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Liam looked at Julian, at his perfect teeth and his expensive suit, and saw nothing but a hollow facade. He felt a profound sense of pity for him. To be so blind, so utterly consumed by the superficial, was its own kind of prison. Liam didn't respond. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out his leather notebook and a silver fountain pen. He made a small, precise notation on a fresh page. Julian watched him, confused. "What's that? Taking notes for your next big shed project?" he sneered. Liam looked up from the page, his eyes holding Julian's for the first time with a flicker of something other than calm indifference. It was the look of a strategist moving a key piece on the board. "No," Liam said softly. "I'm just documenting a debt. I find it's always best to keep a detailed record." He closed the notebook, the soft click of the magnetic clasp sounding like a gavel in the quiet hallway. He walked away, leaving Julian standing there, momentarily silenced by a response he could not categorize and therefore could not comprehend. In the car on the way home, Chloe had been silent, the air thick with things unsaid. She didn't apologize. She didn't have to. Her silence at the dinner table had said everything. Liam knew then that reinforcement was no longer an option. It was time to draw up plans for a demolition. The idea for Ethelgard had been born from a single sketch in his notebook, a swirling design of light and space that he'd drawn one sleepless night. It was his answer to the soulless, corporate architecture he had fled. He wanted to create not just a building, but an experience, a place that felt both grand and intimate, timeless and modern. He poured all his frustration, all his ambition, all his quiet, burning passion into the project. He'd secured funding not through traditional banks, but through a small, forward-thinking investment group he'd cultivated a relationship with for years. They were a silent partner who believed in his vision, not his balance sheet. They saw the genius in his blueprints, the meticulous attention to every single detail. They gave him complete creative control. He spent 18 months overseeing every aspect of its construction, from the milling of the custom woodwork to the weaving of the specific fabric for the banquettes. He named it Ethelgard, an Old English name meaning noble protector, a quiet tribute to the sanctuary his work had become for him. It was his fortress of solitude, built in the heart of the city. The week before it opened, Chloe had come home waving her phone. "Oh my God, Liam, you will not believe this," she'd said, her voice buzzing with an excitement he hadn't heard directed at him in months. "Julian is taking me to the opening of that new restaurant downtown. Ethelgard. It's supposed to be impossible to get a table. He knows the owner or something. It's a huge networking opportunity." Liam had been standing at the kitchen counter, reviewing a final invoice for the restaurant's bespoke cutlery. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Ethelgard," he repeated, the name sounding foreign and familiar at the same time, coming from her lips. "Yes, everyone is dying to go. It's supposed to be the most beautiful space in the city." She paused and then delivered the final, casual blow. "You probably wouldn't enjoy it, anyway. It's very upscale. A bit stuffy, you know." The implication was clear. You don't belong in a world like that. You, with your dusty clothes and your modest life. This is my world now. His world. He felt the familiar cold calm wash over him. This was the moment. The culmination of all the small insults, the death by 1,000 cuts. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for dramatic irony. "No, you're right," he said, his voice quiet and even. "You two should go. Have a wonderful time." She seemed relieved, pleased by his easy acquiescence. "Great. It's next Saturday. I'll probably be home late." She kissed him on the cheek, a quick, dismissive peck, and floated out of the room, already planning her outfit. Liam stood alone in the kitchen, the invoice in his hand. He looked down at the letterhead, Ethelgard. Below it, in small, elegant print, Proprietor, Liam Collier. He took a slow breath. He walked over to the small desk in the corner of their living room and made a call. "Isabel," he said, his voice losing its gentle, domestic tone and taking on the crisp authority of a commander. "It's Liam. I need you to do something for me. Saturday night. I need a reservation for 2, prime table, under the name Julian Croft. Yes, make sure he receives the best of everything. The absolute best. And Isabel, I'll also need a small table for 1 in the west alcove." Under my own name, there was a pause. "Yes," he said, "I think it's time for a performance review." On the night of the date, a quiet storm was brewing inside Liam. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was a sense of profound, tectonic certainty. The evening felt preordained, the final act of a play he had both written and directed. While Chloe was in their bedroom, a whirlwind of expensive fabrics and perfumes, preparing for her grand night out with Julian, Liam was in his study, methodically preparing himself. He didn't choose a flashy suit. That was Julian's armor. Instead, he selected a simple, dark charcoal suit, impeccably tailored from a heavy English wool. It was the first suit he had bought after securing the funding for Ethelgard, a quiet promise he had made to himself. He paired it with a crisp white shirt and a plain silk tie the color of a stormy sea. He was not dressing to impress. He was dressing for a board meeting, a final, binding resolution. When Chloe emerged, she was a vision in emerald green silk, a dress he knew cost more than their monthly mortgage payment. She looked stunning, and for a fleeting moment, he felt a pang of the love they had once shared, a ghost of the woman who had fallen for the quiet boy in the library. "How do I look?" she asked, twirling for him. "You look beautiful, Chloe," he said, and he meant it. The compliment seemed to land without impact, a pebble tossed into a raging river. "Julian will be here any minute," she said, checking her reflection, smoothing down the silk. "Don't wait up." The casual cruelty of it was almost elegant in its simplicity. He merely nodded. "Have a good night." He heard the roar of Julian's sports car arrive, then the sound of their laughter as they left. The silence that descended on the apartment was heavy, final. He stood there for a long moment, then walked to his car. His modest sedan felt like an extension of himself, unassuming on the outside, but perfectly maintained, reliable, and ready to perform its function. The drive to Ethelgard was serene. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon and gold. He didn't use the public valet service, swarmed with patrons. Instead, he drove around to a private rear entrance, where a simple, understated gate slid open silently at his approach. He parked in a space marked with a small, elegant brass plaque. L. Collier, founder. He entered not through the grand main doors, but through a quiet side entrance that led directly into the heart of the restaurant's operations. The frantic, controlled chaos of the kitchen greeted him, a world of steam, clattering pans, and urgent, hushed commands. The head chef, a culinary giant named Antoine, saw him and gave a sharp, respectful nod without breaking his rhythm. Liam returned it, a silent exchange of mutual admiration. He found Isabel in her small, glass-walled office overlooking the main floor. She was a tall, severe woman in her 50s, with a reputation for running the tightest ships in the hospitality industry. He had hired her not for her warmth, but for her unwavering competence. She stood as he entered. "Mr. Collier," she said, her voice crisp. "Everything is in order." "Isabel," he replied, his tone warm. "Please, we've been over this." "It's Liam." A rare, fleeting smile touched her lips. "Liam, your special guests have not yet arrived. Their table is ready. The 1982 Petrus you requested is breathing in the cellar. Chef Antoine has prepared a special tasting menu." "Excellent. And my table?" "The west alcove. As you specified. It's discreet, but with a clear view of the entire floor. A whiskey and water is waiting for you." "You think of everything, Isabel." "It is my job, sir," she said, "to anticipate the needs of the owner." He walked out of her office and onto a small catwalk that overlooked the dining room. Down below, the patrons were a sea of quiet conversations and elegant attire. The lighting was exactly as he designed it, creating pools of warm intimacy. The acoustics were perfect, absorbing excess noise, so that the collective murmur of the room was a pleasant hum, not a cacophony. He felt a swell of pride. This was real. This was his. This was the foundation he had built while his own home crumbled. He descended a private spiral staircase, the wrought iron cool beneath his hand, and made his way to his table. He sat, took a sip of his whiskey, and opened his leather notebook to a blank page. The stage was set. He was ready for the overture. The grand entrance of Ethelgard was designed to be a moment of transition. Guests passed through heavy, sound-dampening oak doors into a small, circular foyer where the clamor of the city was instantly replaced by a curated, calming soundscape. The air itself seemed different, tinged with the faint, clean scent of beeswax and old leather. It was a space intended to humble, to prepare one for the experience to come. Julian Croft, however, was not a man easily humbled. He strode in with Chloe on his arm, as if he were a conquering general entering a newly captured city. "Croft, party of two," he announced to the hostess at the maitre d's station, his voice several decibels too loud for the serene environment. He didn't say it as a statement of arrival, but as a demand for immediate recognition. The hostess, a young woman named Anya whom Liam had personally trained, offered him a polite, practiced smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She consulted her tablet. "Of course, Mr. Croft. We have a lovely table for you this evening. If you'll just follow me." "Should be a lovely table," Julian muttered to Chloe, just loud enough for Anya to hear. "I practically know the owner." From his alcove, Liam watched the exchange with a detached amusement. He saw Anya's smile tighten by a millimeter, the only sign of her professional restraint. She led them through the main dining room, a path that Liam had specifically requested from Isabel. It took them directly past the grand, floor-to-ceiling wine cellar, a two-story glass and steel structure that was the restaurant's architectural centerpiece. "Incredible, isn't it?" Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with genuine awe. She was captivated by the beauty of the room, by the sheer artistry of it all. For a moment, she was the woman Liam had married, the one who appreciated design and form. Julian, however, was determined to maintain his air of sophisticated boredom. "It's a bit much, don't you think?" he said, gesturing dismissively at the cellar. "A little ostentatious. Tries too hard. I've seen better in Dubai." Liam took a slow sip of his whiskey. Every insult Julian uttered was a gift. Each condescending remark was another brick in the wall of his own justification. He was not just observing a date. He was gathering evidence. Anya seated them at what was arguably the best table in the house. It was a semicircular banquette upholstered in deep blue velvet, offering both privacy and a sweeping view of the room. A single, perfect white orchid stood in a slender vase at its center. "This will do," Julian said, sinking into the velvet as if it were a throne. He immediately began to critique his surroundings, his voice a running commentary of unsolicited opinion. "The lighting fixtures are a strange choice. Very derivative of mid-century modern, but without the authenticity. And the art," he gestured to a large, abstract painting on the far wall, a piece Liam had commissioned from a brilliant but unknown local artist. "Looks like something my nephew could paint." Chloe shifted uncomfortably. She wanted to be impressed, to give herself over to the magic of the place, but Julian's relentless negativity was like a constant, jarring noise. "I think it's beautiful, Julian," she said, her voice small. "It's fine for this city," he conceded, already bored with the decor. He snapped his fingers to summon the sommelier, a man in his 60s with a silver taste vin hanging from a ribbon around his neck. It was a gesture of such profound disrespect that a hush fell over the nearby tables. The sommelier, a legend in the industry named Jean-Pierre, arrived without betraying a flicker of annoyance. "Good evening, sir. Madam, bring us your best bottle of red," Julian commanded, not even looking at the encyclopedic wine list in his hands. "Something French. Impressive." Jean-Pierre bowed slightly. "An excellent choice, sir. Might I recommend the 1982 Chateau Petrus? Is drinking exceptionally well this evening." Julian's eyes lit up. He knew the name, of course. It was one of those labels people like him drop to signal their supposed connoisseurship. "Yes, perfect. Bring it." Liam watched as the elaborate ritual of the wine service began. He knew that specific bottle. There were only 6 in the cellar. He had sourced them himself from a private collector in Bordeaux. The cost of that single bottle was more than the down payment on their first apartment. It was a wine meant to be savored, respected. Jean-Pierre presented the bottle, uncorked it with surgical precision, and poured a small amount for Julian to taste. Julian swirled the glass with an exaggerated motion, stuck his nose deep into it, and then took a sip. He held the wine in his mouth for a moment, his cheeks puffed out like a hamster's, before swallowing. He made a face. "No," he said, shaking his head with an air of great disappointment. "It's corked. Tainted. Take it back." A collective, silent gasp seemed to emanate from the staff who could overhear. Jean-Pierre's face remained a mask of professional calm, but Liam could see the tightening around his eyes. He knew, as did Jean-Pierre, that the wine was perfect. Julian was simply performing again, trying to establish dominance over an expert in his own field. "My apologies, sir," Jean-Pierre said, his voice impossibly smooth. "I will bring another bottle for your approval." "See that you do," Julian said, waving him away. He turned to Chloe with a self-satisfied smirk. "You have to keep these people on their toes. They'll try to pass anything off on you if you let them." Chloe looked mortified, staring down at the pristine white tablecloth. The magic of the evening was shattering. This wasn't the sophisticated networking event she had imagined. It was a public display of her companion's boorishness. Liam made another small note in his book. The list of grievances was growing longer. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were an anthropologist observing the bizarre mating rituals of a particularly odious species. The frustration and anger he had felt for months were beginning to transmute into something else, a cold, crystalline resolve. The time for observation was almost over. The second bottle of Petrus was brought, and this time Julian magnanimously declared it acceptable. The meal began, a 7-course tasting menu that was a testament to Chef Antoine's genius. Each plate was a work of art, a delicate balance of flavors and textures that Liam had sampled and approved weeks ago. Julian, naturally, found fault with everything. The seared foie gras was a bit pedestrian, the consommé lacked a certain depth, the Wagyu beef, sourced from a specific farm in Japan that Liam had spent a month cultivating a relationship with, was decent, but I've had better in Tokyo. With each pronouncement, he was not just insulting the chef, he was insulting Liam. Every criticism was a direct, if unknowing, attack on the passion and obsession that had fueled this entire enterprise. Liam ate his own simple meal of steak frites, a staff favorite not on the public menu, and watched the drama unfold. He saw Chloe growing quieter, smaller. The emerald green of her dress seemed to lose its luster under the harsh glare of Julian's ego. She was trying to enjoy it, taking small, appreciative bites, but her smiles were strained. Then, Julian's gaze swept the room again, an emperor surveying his domain. His eyes landed on Liam's secluded table. He squinted, then nudged Chloe. "Hey, look at that poor schmuck over there," he said, his voice a stage whisper that carried easily in the acoustically perfect room. "All alone on a Saturday night. Probably got stood up. Or maybe this is all he can afford. Just a glass of water and an appetizer," he chuckled. "Sad. Really sad." Chloe, following his gaze, looked over. Her eyes met Liam's. Time seemed to freeze. The ambient hum of the restaurant faded into nothingness. In that single, silent moment, her entire world reconfigured itself. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of bone china. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. It was not a look of surprise. It was a look of pure, unadulterated horror. The kind of horror one feels upon realizing the monster is not under the bed, but has been sleeping beside you all along. Liam did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply held her gaze, his expression calm, measured, and deeply, profoundly sad. And then he gave her the smallest, most infinitesimal nod. A nod of acknowledgement. A nod that said, "Yes, it's me, and you are exactly where I knew you would be." Julian, oblivious, was still laughing. "What's wrong, babe? You look like you've seen a ghost. You know that guy?" Chloe couldn't speak. She could only stare at her husband, sitting alone in the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place she had told him he wouldn't belong, looking more at home than anyone in the room. The carefully constructed reality she had built for herself over the past year, the one where Liam was the failure and Julian was the prize, had just been hit by a wrecking ball, and she was standing at ground zero, The air around their table became thick and heavy, charged with the energy of a lightning strike. Julian finally noticed Chloe's frozen state. "Chloe? What is it? Seriously, what's wrong?" he demanded, his irritation growing. The performance had been interrupted, and he was losing his audience. Chloe swallowed hard, her eyes still locked on Liam. That's my husband," she whispered, the words barely audible. Julian's smug expression dissolved, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then disbelief. He looked back at Liam's table, then at Chloe, then back again, as if trying to solve a particularly difficult math problem. "Your husband? The shed designer? What the hell is he doing here?" And then Liam stood up. It was a simple movement, but it carried an extraordinary weight. As he rose from his chair, a subtle shift occurred throughout the dining room. The staff, from the bussers to the maitre d', seemed to straighten, their attention pulled towards him as if by an invisible string. It was an unconscious display of deference, a magnetic alignment toward the true north of the room's power structure. He placed his napkin neatly on the table, took one last look at the open page in his notebook, and then began to walk toward them. He moved without haste, his steps deliberate and sure on the polished oak floor he had chosen. With every step he took, the balance of power in the room, in their lives, tilted irrevocably in his favor. Isabel, the manager, emerged from her office and intercepted him halfway, falling in a step beside him like a trusted adjutant joining her general. Her presence amplified his authority, confirming it for anyone who might still have doubts. Julian watched them approach, his confusion curdling into defensive arrogance. He puffed out his chest, a cornered animal preparing to display aggression. "Can we help you?" he said as Liam and Isabel stopped beside their table. His tone was dismissive, an attempt to reassert his dominance. "We're in the middle of a private dinner here, pal." Liam ignored him for a moment, his gaze fixed on Chloe. He saw the shame, the fear, and the dawning, terrible understanding in her eyes. He had wanted her to see, and now she was seeing. He finally turned his attention to the man who had so casually and consistently disrespected him. "Hello, Julian," Liam said, his voice calm and clear, yet carrying an edge of steel that cut through the remaining buzz of the room. He extended a hand, not as a greeting, but as a formality one might observe before a duel. "I'm Liam Collier." Julian stared at the offered hand as if it were a snake, then reluctantly shook it. "I know who you are. What do you want?" Liam withdrew his hand and turned his gaze back to his wife. His voice softened, but the steel remained. "I'm surprised to see you here, Chloe," he said, the words landing with devastating precision. "If I remember correctly, you thought this place might be a bit too stuffy for me." The quiet bomb had been detonated. The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe flinched as if he had struck her. In that moment, surrounded by the opulence she had craved, she had never looked more impoverished. Julian, still failing to grasp the enormity of the situation, scoffed. "She was just being nice, buddy. This place is way out of your league. So why don't you just run along back to your sad little table before I have security show you out?" He gestured vaguely at Isabel. "Miss, this man is harassing us." Isabel looked from Julian to Liam, her expression unreadable. She waited. Liam almost smiled. The blindness of Julian's arrogance was more complete than he could have imagined. "Security?" Liam repeated, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. "You want Isabel, my general manager, to have me removed from my own restaurant?" The words hung in the air for a long, agonizing second. "You're what?" Julian stammered, the bluster finally draining from his voice. "My restaurant," Liam said again, enunciating each word with quiet finality. He gestured around the room, a sweeping, proprietary motion that encompassed everything from the soaring ceiling to the velvet banquette on which they Saturday. "I designed it. I built it. I own it." To punctuate the statement, he reached into his jacket and retrieved the symbolic object, the silent witness to his long humiliation, the small, leather-bound notebook. He placed it on the center of the table with a soft, definitive thud. It lay there between the half-eaten plates of gourmet food and the obscenely expensive bottle of wine, an unassuming book that held the power to shatter their world. "This," Liam said, tapping the cover, "is the little project you were so fond of mocking, Julian. These are the sheds I've been designing." He opened the notebook. The pages were filled not with random doodles, but with intricate, breathtakingly detailed architectural drawings. He flipped through them, a cascade of genius and obsession. There was the initial sketch of the wine cellar, the precise schematics for the lighting fixtures Julian had called derivative, the detailed plans for the very table at which they were seated. It was all there, the entire soul of Ethelgard, captured in graphite and ink. "You see," Liam continued, his voice a low, mesmerizing current, "you thought my work was small because it was quiet. You thought I was weak because I was patient. That is the fatal flaw of men like you, Julian. You confuse noise with substance. You mistake arrogance for strength." Julian's face had gone slack, his jaw hanging open. His expensive suit suddenly seemed ill-fitting, a costume for a part he had just been fired from. He looked from a notebook to Liam's face, the gears of his mind grinding to a halt as he tried to process a reality so completely at odds with his own. Chloe was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks, ruining her carefully applied makeup. She didn't try to wipe them away. It was a baptism of shame. Liam wasn't finished. The assessment was over. The verdict was in. It was time for the sentencing. He turned his full attention to Julian, and the list of grievances began. 3 months ago, Liam started, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "At Chloe's parents' house, you called my life's work a project for garden sheds. You told me to step up or step aside from my own marriage. You stood in my wife's family home and attempted to assert your dominance over me." I remember the exact words. He paused, letting the memory hang in the air between them. 2 months ago, at a company event for Chloe's firm that she begged me to attend, you loudly recounted a story about a friend who was an architect but couldn't hack it in the real world and had to go back to teaching. You looked right at me when you told it. You thought I didn't notice. 1 month ago, he continued, his cadence unhurried, relentless. You sent Chloe a link to a job posting for a junior draftsman with a note that said, "Maybe this will help your husband get back on his feet." You thought it was a joke, a display of your casual power. You advised my wife on how to manage my career, a career you couldn't begin to comprehend. And tonight, you walked into my creation, a place I poured my soul into, and you insulted it. You insulted my staff. You feigned knowledge you do not possess, sending back a flawless bottle of wine that costs more than most people's rent just to feel powerful. And then you looked at me, sitting at this table, and you called me a poor schmuck. You pitted me. Liam leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, the full weight of his quiet, righteous anger finally showing in his eyes. "Let me be clear, Julian. You are not in my league. You are a tourist in a world that I have built from the ground up. You are a footnote in my story. Your money is just paper. It's a tool. It doesn't make you a better man. It just makes you a wealthier one. And from where I'm sitting, it seems to have made you a poorer human being." Every word was a perfectly aimed blow. Julian, who lived by the sword of verbal dominance and condescension, was being systematically dismantled by it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no defense. The truth was absolute, irrefutable. Liam had held up the moral mirror, and the reflection was hideous. Finally, Julian found his voice, but it was a reedy, desperate version of his former boom. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I had no idea. It was just banter. You know." Liam looked at him with something that transcended pity. It was a look of profound finality. "No, Julian, it wasn't banter. It was the clear and consistent expression of your character. And I have seen enough." He straightened up and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Isabel. She stepped forward, her presence suddenly formidable. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice devoid of all warmth, "your meal has been comped this evening. However, your presence is no longer welcome at Ethelgard. Now, or at any time in the future, our security will escort you out." 2 large men in subtle dark suits materialized, as if from the shadows. They stood on either side of Julian. They didn't touch him, but their presence was an iron wall. Julian's face cycled through a series of emotions. Outrage, panic, pleading. You can't do this. I'm a patron here. Chloe. He turned to her as last hope. Tell him he can't do this. Chloe couldn't even look at him. She was staring at the wreck of her dinner, at the beautiful, damning notebook in the center of the table. She said nothing. Her silence, which had once condemned Liam, now condemned Julian. It was a perfect, brutal symmetry. Julian stood up, his movements jerky, his bravado utterly shattered. He looked at Liam one last time, a desperate, pleading look. Liam, man, please. Liam simply held his gaze, his expression unchanging. He gave another small nod, this one directed at the security detail. They gently, but firmly, guided Julian away from the table. He didn't resist. The entire dining room watched in stunned silence as the loud, confident man was quietly and efficiently removed from the premises like a piece of garbage being taken out. The silence he left behind was immense. It was just Liam and Chloe, alone at the table in the heart of the magnificent room. The performance was over. Now, only the wreckage remained. The air was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 unspoken resentments and a future that had just been erased. Liam slowly sat down in the chair Julian had vacated, directly across from his wife. He did not speak. He simply waited. He had all the time in the world. After all, he owned the place. The silence stretched, taut, and agonizing. It was broken only by the faint, distant clink of silverware from other tables, a sound from a world that was no longer theirs. Chloe finally lifted her head, her face a mess of tear-streaked makeup and raw shame. Her eyes, when they met his, were filled with a desperate plea for an absolution he was not ready to give. Liam, I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. I had no idea. I never would have if I had known. Her words trailed off because she heard them, too. If I had known. The conditional nature of her apology was the most damning part of all. It wasn't an apology for her behavior, for her disloyalty, for the slow, painful death of her respect for him. It was an apology for getting caught on the wrong side of power. Liam's expression didn't soften. The righteous anger had subsided, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. He had won, but the victory felt hollow, like the shell of a building after a fire. "Known what, Chloe?" he asked, his voice quiet, forcing her to lean in to confront the space between them. That my work was successful? That I had money? Is that the prerequisite for your respect? For your loyalty? No, it's not like that, she insisted, but her words lacked conviction. They were the reflexive defense of someone who had not yet fully faced their own reflection in the moral mirror he held up. Then what is it like? He pressed, relentless not with anger, but with the calm, cutting logic of a prosecutor. Let's be honest for once. Let's talk about the foundation. You love that word. You used to tell me our love was built on a solid foundation. But a foundation is tested by stress, Chloe. And when the stress came, when I gave up a steady paycheck to chase a dream, our dream, I thought the foundation cracked. And you didn't try to repair it. You welcomed the wrecking ball. He gestured to the empty space where Julian had been. You let that man, that hollow, arrogant shell of man, into our life. You let him sit at your parents' table and mock me. And you said nothing. You laughed. You chose his shallow validation over my dignity. Why? She shook her head, tears flowing freely now. I don't know. I was insecure, afraid. All my friends, their husbands were getting promotions, buying things, and we're going backward. I felt like I was failing. Like we were failing. We were not failing. Liam corrected her gently. I was building. You just couldn't see the blueprints. You chose to see a hole in the ground instead of the skyscraper that was planned for it. You listened to a man who values things over people. Did his opinion of me matter more than your own? She had no answer. There was no answer that could absolve her. Her silence was a confession. He told me I needed to step up or step aside. Liam said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. That night at your parents' house. He said you were a thoroughbred, and I was keeping you in a stable. Did you feel that way, Chloe? Did you feel stable? Liam, please stop, she begged, covering her face with her hands. No, he said, his voice firm but not cruel. We're not stopping. We're finishing this. For 7 years, I was your husband, the man you promised to love, honor, and respect. In sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth. It seems we only managed the wealth part, and only when it was obvious. The moment it became a question, your honor and respect vanished. You traded them for a seat at a table like this, a table you thought I could never afford. He paused, letting the truth of his words settle into the space between them. The irony, of course, is that I built the table. He stood up. The finality of the movement was unmistakable. The meal is paid for. The wine is paid for. It was, as you said, a great networking opportunity. You learned something of value tonight. Liam, where are you going? She asked, panic rising in her voice. Don't leave me here. I'm going home, he said. I'll come with you, she said, starting to get up. He held up a hand, stopping her. No, I'm going to my home, the apartment I keep in the city, the one you never knew about, because I needed a place where my work was respected. I needed a place that felt like my own. The existence of a secret apartment was the final, devastating blow. It was proof that he had been building a life separate from her for months, a life she had no part in. She had not just been blind, she had been rendered irrelevant. You can take a taxi, he said, his voice now devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a stranger. Or perhaps you can call Julian. I'm sure he'd be happy to give you a ride. After all, he has a very impressive car. He turned and walked away without looking back. He didn't stride triumphantly through the dining room. He walked with the heavy, weary steps of a man who had just been forced to demolish his own home. He passed by Isabel, who stood waiting by the exit. Is everything all right, Liam? She asked, her professional veneer cracking to reveal genuine concern. Liam paused and looked back at the room he had created. He saw his wife, sitting alone and broken at the most coveted table in the city. No, Isabel, he said softly, but it will be. He walked out the private entrance and into the cool night air. He got into his unassuming car, the symbol of his supposed failure, and drove away, leaving behind the glittering, beautiful, empty monument to his success. The vindication was complete, but the cost had been immense. The weeks that followed were a study in divergence. Liam's life, untethered from the weight of Chloe's disappointment, ascended with breathtaking speed. Nexus Designs, once a one-man operation run from a corner of his apartment, was now the most talked-about architectural firm in the city. The success of Ethelgard had been a thunderclap, announcing his arrival not just as a competent architect, but as a visionary. Contracts for new projects flooded in, a modern art museum, a sustainable urban residential tower, a concert hall. His drawing projects were now set to reshape the city skyline. He moved fully into his city apartment, a spacious, minimalist loft overlooking the river. It was a space that reflected him completely. Clean lines, honest materials, and an abundance of natural light. It was filled with books on structural engineering, models of his upcoming projects, and the quiet hum of his own ambition. He worked long, fulfilling hours, surrounded by a small, brilliant team who shared his passion. They respected him not for his wealth, but for his talent and his integrity. He was a kind but demanding leader, pushing them to do their best work while ensuring they felt valued. The atmosphere at Nexus Designs was one of collaborative genius, a stark contrast to the toxic, ego-driven world Julian had inhabited. Julian, meanwhile, had plummeted. The story of his public humiliation at Ethelgard had spread like wildfire through the city's elite social and financial circles. It was too delicious a piece of gossip to remain contained. He became a cautionary tale, a punchline at cocktail parties. His carefully cultivated image of a powerful, sophisticated player was shattered. At work, his colleagues looked at him differently. His bluster now seemed pathetic, his confidence hollow. His trades, once bold, became hesitant. He made a series of disastrous calls, losing the firm a significant amount of money. Within a month, he was quietly let go, forced to resign to avoid the further embarrassment of being fired. His screaming red sports car was repossessed. He faded into the obscurity he had always feared, a ghost haunting the steakhouses and clubs he could no longer afford. His fall was as swift and brutal as his rise had been artificial. Chloe's path was the most complex. After that night, she had returned to an empty apartment that felt like a museum of her own bad choices. Every corner held a memory of Liam's quiet presence, a presence she had taken for granted and then actively scorned. She was forced to confront the woman she had become, shallow, insecure, and starstruck by the most superficial trappings of success. She moved out a week later, renting a small, anonymous apartment on the other side of town. She quit her job at the finance firm, unable to face the whispers and the pitying looks. The world she had so desperately wanted to be a part of had rejected her as completely as it had rejected Julian. She was adrift. 1 month after their dinner at Ethelgard, a handwritten letter arrived at Liam's office. The envelope was simple, her name written in the familiar cursive he knew so well. He opened it with a sense of detached curiosity. It was not a plea for reconciliation. It was not a list of excuses. It was, for the first time, a genuine apology. She wrote about her fear, her envy of her friends, and the deep-seated insecurity that had led her to mistake Julian's flashy confidence for strength. She acknowledged her cruelty, her silent complicity in Liam's humiliation. "You are building a cathedral," she wrote, "and I was complaining about the dust from the construction site. I was so focused on the inconvenience of the present that I couldn't see the masterpiece you were creating. The failure wasn't yours, Liam. It was mine. My failure of faith, of vision, and of love." She didn't ask for him back. She simply stated that she was taking time to figure out who she was without the validation of a successful partner, whether it was the quiet architect or the loud trader. She was starting over from the foundation up. Liam read the letter twice. He felt a sense of closure, a melancholy peace. He had wanted her to understand, and now she did. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet sadness for what they had lost, and a flicker of hope for the person she might become. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, alongside the legal papers for their divorce, which he had instructed his lawyer to handle as gently and generously as possible. His own vindication had come not on the night he had exposed Julian, but in the days and weeks that followed. It came in the quiet satisfaction of seeing his designs come to life. It came from the respect of his peers and the loyalty of his team. He had learned that true power wasn't the ability to humiliate others, but the ability to build things that last. True wealth wasn't measured by a bank account, but by the integrity of one's work and the strength of one's character. The story ends not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet moment of reflection. It's a late afternoon, and Liam is standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, which occupies the top floor of a building he himself designed. Below him, the city sprawls out, a complex tapestry of lives and ambitions. The sun is setting, casting a golden glow on the skyline he is actively helping to shape. On the massive drafting table behind him, new blueprints are laid out. It's a project for a public library, a free and open space for everyone, a quiet rebuke to the exclusionary world of places like Ethelgard. He looks at the plans, then back out the window. He feels a sense of profound peace. He had faced betrayal and humiliation, and he had not allowed it to make him bitter or cruel. He had channeled his pain into creation, his frustration into focus. He had maintained his dignity, his moral high ground, and in doing so, had achieved a victory more complete than any simple revenge. He picks up his old leather notebook, its pages now filled with the history of his ascent. He runs his hand over the worn cover, a faint smile on his lips. He had proven his point. True worth is not in what others think of you, but in what you quietly build day by day when no one is watching. So what do you all think? Was Liam's response justified, or did he go too far? It's a tough question, and we'd love to hear your take in the comments below. This story is a powerful reminder that our value isn't determined by flashy appearances or the opinions of those who would tear us down, but by our own integrity, patience, and the silent, steady work we put into building our own lives. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more tales of justice and redemption. We have a lot more stories coming your way. Until next time, remember to be the architect of your own life and build a foundation that no one can shake.